Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Checker. Welcome to minute 16 of the Awake Minute by Minute podcast. I'll be your host today, Chris, and with me are the usual suspect, Priyank and Mike. Priyank, Mike, hi, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Well, it's all evening, isn't it, for you guys? So, how are you both? Priyank, how are you today?
Very good. Had quite a busy day. Took the car to the mechanic and lots of being stuck on the bus.
Oh dear, on the bus. COVID friendly, I hope.
Yes.
Just about. Mike, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. I didn't have such a busy day today. I came back from Italy last night, so
Tell us about your retreat, your spiritual retreat.
that was very nice. It was mostly devotees, and we rented a Catholic monastery near La Spezia in Liguria, and it was great because those are Catholic monks, but they keep asking us, what are you doing? Like, when we do energization exercises, they're like, what is this? And like, are you sure this is Christian? And like, yeah. But they're lovely, and it's very simple. And all the rooms there are very simple, but they have like a 5-star view. Like it's like the best place ever to have a monastery. And it has a very good vibe.
Were they like, why is there a bright star appearing in the middle of your forehead?
Yes. And they asked me, like, can you show it to me? And I was like, yes, sit down on a tiger skin. No.
You're bringing them the white dove.
Yeah. No, but it's very nice. Very good experience.
Very good. Very good. Well, welcome back. You're quite the traveler. So, we actually have one of your kin on the first part of this minute, and we have a great minute to talk about it, so we can really delve into it because we'll have plenty of content here to go over. So the start of the minute, really, we have a lovely image of Sigmund Freud, and it looks like there's a clipping of a news article taken, and it's on display here for us to read. And the headline, I'll read the headline. Really, it's talking about religion doomed, Freud asserts, and says how we must. It is at a point where we must give way before science, or religion must give way before science. And I thought, Mike, you might know this guy. He's one of your kin, isn't he? He's Austrian. So, what do you know about Sigmund Freud, Mike?
Just because I'm in Vienna. Yeah. I mean, I think that was also something at this time. The religion was losing. I mean, it wasn't just then; it was already happening hundreds of years before. But religion had really lost a big parts of the society, and most of the people who considered themselves intellectuals were not religious. And Sigmund Freud, when he made his first strides into what he then called psychoanalysis, psychology, he found out about the mind, about the subconsciousness. He then thought, religion doesn't talk about this. How come we figure this out and religion doesn't? And maybe that led him to saying that religion is at a point where it must give way to science. That's kind of how this made sense to me. I mean, there's so much more to say about this, because later on in the movie they talk about why Guruji named his talk Science of Religion and stuff. So it was badly needed, in my opinion.
Yeah. And why did Freud leave Vienna, Mike? Why did he leave your hometown?
That's part of our dark history that we don't talk about. No, I'm kidding. We did talk about it a lot. Yeah, he was Jewish, and he left Vienna in 1938 because he didn't feel safe anymore. Right. That was for the best, I think. So I think he went to London and then later on to the States.
Mm-hmm. And Priyank, maybe you know what he was most famous for. Some of his teachings, do you?
Yes, I often mock my wife and my brother-in-law for classic Oedipus complex of the Freud's theory, where secretly sons have a secret desire for their mother, and daughters have a secret desire for their father, or a subconscious one, and it manifests in various ways. That's his most controversial and complex psychoanalysis, I think, theory. It does manifest, I think, in quite a lot of families. Similar, he's a mama's boy or she's a daddy's girl. It kind of is like it's a cliche, but I think it has some strange basis to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, very complicated, isn't it? The workings of the mind, and to my favorite subject, going to the yugas and everything. I've mentioned it in every single minute.
All right, fine, Chris. We have to do a special on yoga. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Let's do it one day.
This is like an endless ream of content in the yugas. The Holy Science is like a podcast in and of itself. But it does strike me like he's one of the four front minds on trying to take the part of the mind of the Buddha, the intellect, and try to dissect things in a way in the Western world, certainly. And it was actually Nietzsche, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Mike, you're nodding. You're nodding. Okay, good. Mm-hmm. It was actually Nietzsche. Just to kind of read this out quickly. What was happening at the time was this was trying to break down the concept of God, and Nietzsche said in 1900s that God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and the mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe, this is quite graphic, who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatest of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? And I just thought this was really timely and worth noting here because, Varun Sunny is speaking here. And of course, Varun is a guest of ours on the podcast. And, anybody who has listened to it is well worth listening. He does speak here after this image, and he says Western philosophers are, talking about the death of God. And Yogananda comes at a time to reconceptualize God and the divine. So I thought, Mike, here's a hospital pass for you. What is the conceptualization of the divine? What do you think Yogananda really is trying to do here?
I mean, maybe it's good that you added the yugas to this conversation because they might help explaining this a little bit. So in my mind, it is like we came into Dwapara Yuga, and this is the age of energy, among other things. And so now our science suddenly starts making strides into all kinds of directions. We figure out electricity or steam engine electricity, telephone, radio, radar, all kinds of cool things. And Western religions, they don't make strides like that. They don't. You don't see the difference between now and then, basically. And they needed. What is a good word for it? Maybe some push to progress into the future, and it looks like this push was just not coming, and so the science was just feeling this makes no sense anymore. We cannot say we're scientists, but we also say religion makes sense because right now it doesn't. There was a dissonance. Hence, someone like Yogananda comes and tries to bridge the gap again in the West.
Mm-hmm. And Priyank, what's your, if you could conceptualize God, how would you do it?
Yeah, I think this concept in the East has always been there, i.e., the multifarious and the personal. The way you imagine God is a very personal choice, a personal inclination. But reconceptualizing the Western image of God, the Father, the Heavenly Father that sits up there amongst the clouds in heavens and judges you. I think that really is the reconceptualization that we're talking about. And we mentioned the yugas, and we're talking about Freud and his revolutionary theories on consciousness, and he's the father of modern, even to this day, of psychology, isn't he? So that reconceptualization for me is really going back to that form of the divine that is most appealing to you personally. So for me personally, I personally visualize God to be in a formless state of Sat Chit Ananda, ever conscious, ever existing, ever new bliss consciousness. So that's how I see it, and I think that's what that means in this context that Varun Soni is saying, and that's a universal way to kind of attract devotees from around the world, not just India but around the West, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a thirst for more knowledge, isn't there? Coming out of the 19th century, there's innovation happening all over the world, and really, if you think of religion, why should that not be innovative as well? Why should the concept of God not be innovative and evolve with our increased understanding of the nature of reality? And I think that's, to my mind, that's what this brings. Yogananda is talking about it in different language in different ways, and helping people to get closer to God. I just wondered, what text did Yogananda really have on trying to understand the mind, as the Western, I suppose scientists and psychoanalysts would have put it. Do we have much in the way of text? Because with the Yogananda talking about the parts of the mind and different aspects, because I know he kept it simple, didn't he? He talked in very plain terms. But are there any texts out there we know of?
So in the Gita, he talks about all the different layers of the mind and memory and all that kind of stuff. Interestingly, you should mention about the books that he would have been exposed to or read, because I was interested in that question. And the last convocation in 2020, we were privileged to have a virtual tour of his rooms and residences, and I actually paused it on his bookshelf. I don't know if they've retained like that bookshelf, but he had various, Bibles and translations of the epics, Indian epics and things like that. So I had a mission actually to write down all those books and just at least browse through them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be pretty epic. Which ones stand out to you? Yeah,
so he had a couple of translations on the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which is, for example, I've got a very long copy of Ramcharitmanas, it's called, of the Ramayana. But there's 2 or 3 translations or orators that I don't know. You guys familiar about the Ramayana?
Not massively, no.
No. So Ramayana.
Mike's nodding.
Mike is familiar with most things in life.
I know that there's like multiple stories of the person who wrote it and stuff like that.
Yes.
And it's the story about Rama, right?
Yes, Rama. So he's considered one of the incarnations of Vishnu. So he's along the same sort of incarnation lines as Krishna and the other saints and gods that have come to India. So yeah, so it's about the life and the pastimes and the teachings of Rama, God Rama.
Pretty epic. There's so much text out there that sometimes I think that you just have to put these things under your pillow and then hope, in your astral form at night you find time to read them when you're dissolving in it. I'm curious about this, and not to go into this too much detail, but I do find it interesting about the aspects of the mind and the human mind, and I think that we'll begin to rationalize this more and more as we go. But it was found on Sadhguru's site, and I'll throw this in for just context, that there's 16 dimensions of the mind fall into 4 categories of the buddhi, manas, ankara, and chitta. So Priyanka mentioned the aspect of Chitta, I think, there. So the Buddhi is the intellect, the Manas is the huge silo of memory that's all across the body, and the Ankara is the sense of identity, the ego, and then the Chitta is the cosmic intelligence, which I suppose is where we all want to be. You know, Chitta is the last point of the mind, and it connects us to the basis of creation within us. So I guess that's where in meditation we might go, but I just thought I'd include that because in my short amount of time that I did on the research, I didn't know exactly where to go for Yogananda's text on this, but interesting nonetheless. So shall we move on? Enough of Freud. Thank you, Freud, for popping into the documentary. It's cool to see.
He's smoking a cigar, he is, isn't he, in that picture? And he's got his fancy pocket watch.
Yeah.
He looks so pompous.
He's looking very dapper. I think that's the word.
That's probably better.
that was 1920s dapper.
Yeah, that's 1920 swag, isn't it? The very, very well trimmed goatees. They seem to all have.
He's doing the people's eyebrow that The Rock does in WWF. Oh, you can do it. Can you smell what The Rock is cooking?
Yeah, I can smell it from here. Yeah. A friend of mine can do both, which I find very impressive.
99% of the people won't understand this joke about The Rock. They're going to be like serious devotees. They're like, who the hell is? Why are you talking about WWF?
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. So we have Paramahansa appearing, talking about the re-conceptualization of God, and that was what Yogananda was doing at a time when God was disappearing from the conversations, really. Then we have some imagery coming up with our good friend Phil Goldberg, who is also a guest on the podcast, or has been a guest on the podcast. So do check that out. Talking, and I'll mention some of the images that pop up because they're quite fun. So you have people that look like they're in a church. They're dressed in their Sunday best. You know, they've got their hats on and suits and dresses. The ladies wearing dresses. And then you have a lovely picture of Yogananda, and I'm guessing he is on a train here, as seems to be a reoccurring theme in the documentary. And he's looking very peaceful with a very gentle smile. And in fact, I think this image has been used before, if I'm not mistaken. But he's looking out the window, very gentle, loving smile, obviously enjoying himself. So we have Phil Goldberg then talking, and he's saying how significant it is that Yogananda's first lecture in America was the science of religion, not Hinduism, because using religious terminology in the Western minds would place his offerings in a box. But self-realization, oh, yoga, oh, those are universal. So that's what he says. So Mike, maybe you can expand on this a little bit for us. What does he mean by putting offerings in a box? Why would it put Yogananda's offerings in a box?
So I'm guessing also the 1920s, they were not the time. I mean, imagine it's 1920s and someone creates an organization called the Congress of Religious Liberals, which means they are not super hardcore into their sect of Christianity or what they're doing. They try to look everything from a little further above, and they try to see commonalities between different sects of Christianity, maybe, or even different religions. So those are like the liberal people of America when it comes to religion. And then, mind you, this organization was only created I think 1900, right? So this is a new thing. And then when you now come and say I'll teach you about Hinduism, then, and you are I don't know, Christian or whatever, right? I feel like then you go okay, you tell me about your religion, that's great. I have mine. We respect each other. In my mind, I don't care about yours. You don't care about mine. We are friends. All good, right? And I feel like Yogananda was trying to break through those images and those ideas and say, I have something to say, not just for Hindus. I have something to say for everybody. That is a universal truth. And and then and I guess he was very clever, like Phil Goldberg says, naming it the science of religion and calling it self-realization, because that was something that could be applied to Christian traditions or Hindu or anything else. I feel like that's where I was trying to go.
Priyank, would you agree with that?
Yep, especially on the subject of that talk, the science of religion, because a lot of his talks and the way he writes in the autobiography of Yogi, he always links spirituality to the science, and he was, in many ways, his language and his terminology and his descriptive way of linking the two was really decades ahead of his time, wasn't it? Whether that shaped the way science and spirituality became in terms of how it defined itself and how it talked about various things like meditation and, the link of the mind and regrooving channels of, neurons in the brain and stuff, all the stuff that benefits from meditation. That probably we can't know for sure, but certainly it would logically feel like it does. And we take, if you take the lessons, for example, that same thing applies there, doesn't it? It's not just do's and don'ts. It's really a scientific. Every lesson is a scientific emphasis on how to transform yourself, and that must have, those seeds were there from literally his first landing and his first talk in America. And I believe that the science of religion, I personally haven't read the talk, but I think you can buy the little pamphlet which the talk wasn't it, Mike? I don't know if
Yes.
either of you read it.
I think so.
No,
What?
Mike?
No, nothing comes to mind.
No, but I imagine it would be along the lines of everything that we do study, and that perhaps listeners can fill this gap for us in our vacant knowledge.
Yeah, the vast empty space which is endless.
The void.
The void. Yeah, cool. I think that's pretty. All agreed on my part. I find it funny actually, even today. If you're talking about, if you use the words science and yoga in the same sentence, yeah, and I have done to actually a family member, and the retort was, well, yoga isn't a science, or that this isn't a science. Then the response is more or less stating that a science must be a hard science of physics or math or whatever it might be. But I think the beautiful discovery or rediscovery is more along the lines of a repeated method that can bring about a specific set of results, and that by definition is scientific method, isn't it? Doing something repeatedly and having others repeat the process. So yeah, it's awesome that he's really cracked that, and it's really aged well, hasn't it? Because in this day and age, it's more relevant, if anything, because science is almost a religion, I would argue, in some people's minds, not itself.
You're getting into hot water for this, Chris, but yeah.
I know.
Scientology.
I'm jumping, but no, it's awesome how well this is aged, and I think how significant it must have been for people to hear that back over 100 years ago. Yeah, over 100 years now. So we have an image of Yogananda standing, full garb. He's got the head turban, and he's surrounded by many sort of old white men. There's one Asian guy, and they're wearing suits and ties, very well dressed, with the goatees and white mustaches and things like this. So they're looking very typical of the 1920s. I suppose middle class man as such. But these gentlemen are part of the International Congress of Religious Liberals. Am I right in saying, Priyank? I think you know a little bit about this image.
Yeah, that's all I know. So it was obviously 1920. So these would have been no doubt his peers when he was delivering his speech at the Congress, and the other religions, as we talked about, are represented here in this lovely image.
So these, I actually looked this up. I googled it essentially, and to try to find out a little bit more about them, who they are.
Shall I share the Shall I share it?
Well, no, there's a couple of things here, but before we do share, there's a very first known photo of the SRF. I did want to say a little bit about this religious liberal group. So when I searched it, I found the International Association for Religious Freedom, the IARF, whom I think is the same body. So on their site, you can see it's quite an interesting organization, and really cool that Yogananda was able to pick them out, because I'm sure he didn't, they don't have Google back then, so he obviously was in the right circles. So they're the world's first international interreligious organization. They promote and support the work of individuals in the cause of religious freedom. So they wish to foster a personal commitment to action in everyone. So the IARF organizes a congress of its members every 4 years. It was founded in 1900, and they have a century-plus history of encouraging tolerance and interfaith encounter through dialogue and social justice projects. And really, that's needed now, possibly more than ever, which is fantastic to see other organizations out there promoting this, not just the SRF, I would argue. So yeah, since founding in 1900, various faiths and traditions have been represented in their groups. So yeah, it's very multidisciplinary group. So I thought I'd share that. That's who he is standing with. So pretty epic that he's representing and flying the flag for religious tolerance and acceptance. So yeah, very nice bits of information. But also, as we know, he, in the same year of 1920, founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. And we do have an image that Priyan can share for us. And it is the first known photo of the Self-Realization Fellowship, where Yogananda is standing with a group in America.
Is it this one, Chris?
No, it's so if you go in there, and then it's the first, so second one, yeah. And then it's the first image that's shown. Yeah.
There you go.
So this is the very first known photo of the SRF, and we have really here Yogoda, Sister Yogoda, here with others. She's standing to his right-hand side, wearing the hat, I believe there. Or is this her? Sorry, to the left, is it?
Left, yes. I don't know, actually. You can tell me.
Sister Yogamata, right?
Sister Yogamata, yeah. And then Dr. and Mrs. Lewis on the far left. And I believe we have a couple cool stories to share on Dr. Lewis. So why don't we kind of jump into that quickly, onto who Dr. Lewis is, and a nice short story to share.
Yeah, so Dr. Lewis, Dr. and Mrs. Lewis, they were amongst, as Chris just mentioned, amongst the first kind of devotees of Yogananda. And no doubt they were very important in the formation and the development of Self-Realization Fellowship, because they were obviously eminent people in their own circle, but also they would have supported. We know from Phil Goldberg's biography of Yogananda that Yogananda through his decades in America often liaised with Dr. Lewis and gave him personal counsel, and no doubt he was therefore a devotee. So here in Phil Goldberg's biography, it talks about Dr. Lewis, and it says as Sri Yukteswar had once told him, Yogananda told his new disciple that he would take charge of his life. So Dr. Lewis did not know what that meant, but he later recalled, "At least I felt it was all right, so I acquiesced." Yogananda leaned forward and placed his forehead on Dr. Lewis's. The student's mind quieted. Then, he reports, he told me to lift my eyes and look to the point between the eyebrows, an internal gaze at the Agna chakra. There appeared the great spiritual light of the spiritual eye. The experience persisted, deepened, brightened, and finally Dr. Lewis saw the little silver star in the center. the epitome of the Christ consciousness. And then, after a pause, the great light over the 1,000-rayed lotus, the most exquisite thing that can be seen. Understandably, the long-time seeker was overwhelmed. And Yogananda then describes further his relationship with his student there. But that was at the pretty much at one of the very first meetings and liaisons in 1920. So he's quite a privileged soul to be given that, really. So no doubt he would have been a devotee from past lives and done a lot of work to warrant such a experience, so easily attained, seemingly easily attained in this life, just by happen to going to one of Yogananda's talks and meeting him after the talk and all that kind of stuff. But no, there's no doubt a hidden meaning and divine plan that was laid out for him.
Yeah, there's probably some history there, no doubt. Yeah, it's not just luck. I do have something here to share as well. So in the late 1920s, it was not long after Yogananda had arrived in America. Yogananda was speaking at the Unitarian Church in the Boston area. So that's where Dr. Lewis's longtime friend, Mrs. Alice Hazy, aka Sister Yogamata, was a member of the congregation. Sister Yogamata said to Dr. Lewis that he should strongly meet. She suggested that strongly that he should meet Yogananda and really introduce the two of them. And I thought it was nice. I did read online on the Yogananda site. WordPress said when Yogananda Paramahansaji first saw Sister Yogamata in the church, God told him she's the one who will start the center. So very, very nice.
Yeah, I have a bit of a little story there, because I went to Boston in, I believe, 2019, and obviously one of the stories in the autobiography is the story with the strawberries, right? Where Guruji, first he doesn't go to Kashmir, then he does go to Kashmir. And then when they go to Kashmir, they buy strawberries on the roadside. And Guruji tries them. He's in the carriage with Sri Yukteswar. And Guruji tries them and they're a bit tart. And he's like, I'm not a big fan. That's not my thing. And then Sri Yukteswar tells him, you will like them in America. And you will say, what delicious strawberries. And then Guruji, of course, says, like, no, I don't think so. And Sister Yogamata, like you said, Chris, is the devotee. They used her, one of the first disciples he had in Boston. And they used to do meditations at her house in Somerville, Boston. And when I went to Boston, I was lucky to meet some devotees there, and one of them lives in that same house, 9 Leicester Terrace, where Sister Yogamata used to live. And the interior looks a bit different now, but of course the strawberry story happened in that house. So when Guruji came years later to Boston, they served strawberries there with like cream and sugar, and he tried it and he said, what delicious strawberries. And then he instantly had a flashback of his time in Kashmir. And yeah, that was kind of one of the things that happened in that house there. And that's when I was there, we had strawberries as well, of course, because that was the fitting occasion.
Do you think Freud would describe that as an actual deja vu?
Maybe. It is like a deja vu, and then later on you come there and reenact it. It's like triple deja vu.
Yeah. I'd like to see what Freud would have made of the autobiography of a yogi. So lovely, very nice. And we move on to what is an awesome inclusion by the editors of The Awake, which is Yogananda speaking. And there's some great shots here actually of the auditoriums being packed, and there's a couple of pictures actually of different angles of auditoriums being packed out, and Yogananda is standing at the front or in the crowd in his full garb, and everybody else is very studious, looking up attentively to him. And it's either in Detroit or Denver, New York. I think there's probably a couple different locations here. So yeah, we have a really awesome audio that we can play of Yogananda, and I think we'll play it now. Priyank, are you?
Mind and the brain are the altars of God. That's where the electricity of God flows down into the nervous system, into the world. And a searchlight of your senses are turned outwards. But when you will reverse the searchlights through Kriya Yoga and be concentrated in the spine, you will behold the Maker. That's what self-realization teaches. The
Awesome. Has anybody ever told anybody who's not a devotee that God exists in your spine? Have you ever tried to say something like that? Because really, what Yogananda is saying here, to repeat it back, to paraphrase, it's talking about the spine and the brain are the altars of God, right? Electricity from God flowing through the nervous system and into the world, reversing, or usually the spotlights of our minds are looking into the external, and if we reverse them, we can concentrate on the spine and behold the Maker. I mean, tell me what. Go, Mike.
I mean, the language today exists much more than it did in Yogananda's time. So a lot of people today, they do yoga or they do Kundalini meditation or something like this, which a lot of people know about. And then they talk about chakras, right? And then we just tell them those chakras are like the seat of God within us, in our body. And boom, you're there. So I feel like it's a lot easier now to tell people that than it used to be in the 1920s. But I see what you mean, and also not everybody is that liberal. Like there's definitely, if I tell this to my grandma, she might not know what to do with it.
It's quite a significant statement, Priyank. What do you recall where you were when you first heard these words, or these types of words, or this being said in this way? Do you recall any kind of moment when you were first on the SRF path where this idea came to you?
Yeah, it was actually interesting you should say that, because I'd obviously naturally I come from this tradition where you look inward and all that kind of stuff for divinity. But really, it was only after I read the autobiography of a yogi and then subsequently registered for the lessons that the reason for doing it crystallized, and it's summed up so well in that little clip that Yogananda just said. It was such a powerful few lines, wasn't it? I feel like that's the kind of thing that he would have said in the auditoriums back then. No doubt, literally, anyone that had their eyes open would instantly shut them and naturally, put their gaze to the Christ Consciousness Center, or the middle of the eyebrows. So for me, it was only after reading the lessons and the autobiography that the reason for doing this really came into my experience.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say to somebody who's hearing this for the first time, doesn't quite know what it means? Mike, you made a pretty good effort actually there to try to translate that. That is pretty impressive. Where would you direct somebody? What would be the first sort of text or first thing that you would recommend that they do?
I mean, I feel like you do need a little bit of you need to be a bit open, and you do need to believe that there is like if you don't like anything about spirituality, if you have a very material mindset, then it will be very hard to explain this to someone, in my opinion. But if someone is already in their mind at least halfway there, and you just need to open 1 or 2 more doors, then it's easier, because like I said, the language is already there. And some people, for example, I recently started watching a show on Netflix that is about near-death experiences, right? And they obviously, if they are true, and I do believe they are, then we are not this body. We are a soul wrapped in a causal body, wrapped in a astral body that can leave this body and still lives on and then can reincarnate. And when you believe that, then you might as well believe that we enter the body through the medulla, and like the life force enters the body through the medulla and is in the brain and in the spine, and from there goes to the nervous systems. I feel like once you believe one part of it, you have to believe all the rest as well. That works to make sense.
Yeah, and to your point, Frank, you mentioned there about Hinduism and how that is quite along the lines really of looking internal, but it's very, very different from the audience that he would have at the time. If you look at one of the images, I think it's minute 1547, when he's standing in this auditorium, and it's, a sea of white faces of white Christian, I'm sure, backgrounds, Protestant, most likely. That faith is entirely different. I know a little bit about it, having come from there when I was very young, and it was more really what was in the Bible and the teachings of compassion and friendship towards others. But Hinduism is very unique in that sense, because it kind of gives you the key. And when I was watching this minute, I actually drew a little symbol of a key, because Yogananda in this sentence gives you the key to knowing God, and it's as close to that as I can really see from other religious texts. Is that your reflections on that as well, correct?
Yeah, and if you interestingly, we were talking about the spine and the link with Christianity, but if you read the autobiography of a yogi, there's lots of references, and I urge you to read the notes, the small notes at the bottom, because there's lots of cross references to the Bible. And here we're talking about the spine, and there's a lovely cross reference to a biblical passage about the 7 stars, and it's in the Bible. It makes absolutely no sense in the context of what's being said, but with reference to what we're talking about here, and the spine and the altar of God and the chakras that we know about, then it makes absolute perfect sense. So the link is no doubt there, and it was known in Christianity and by Jesus Christ, but he talked in a different language, because that terminology, as what Mike said, wasn't at that time, wasn't there, was it?
And it's interesting, talked in a different language, different to what? It's different to the understanding of the peoples of the time. So they don't understand the ideas behind the words. He mentioned electricity. The electricity of God flows through the nervous system. These understandings, that wasn't common to many people's minds as it is today, right? So even today, it's funny, Phil Goldberg earlier in the minute said how Yogananda was using words that were universal, self-realization and yoga. But really, I have to correct him. They weren't universal at the time, were they? In the 1920s, how many people would hold up their hands and say they've heard of yoga, let alone they know what it was?
I think you're right, but I feel like they might not have been so popular yet, but they were like just discovered recently. Mm-hmm. And so people who are now maybe into new things like, I don't know, AI, or into DNA manipulation or something, they might back then have been into electricity and might have thought, how will electricity change our society, and those kind of things. And then comes along Yogananda, takes all those terms and gives them a spiritual meaning. Mm-hmm. And I can see that there must have been definitely a section of society that was super interested in this, because this combination of science and spirituality made sense for them and made them feel like this is something great.
Priyank, you're holding a looks like a book.
It's interesting because I've got, you see, like I keep notes in my copy of the Bible, which is quite an old copy, and this is obviously this is an illustrated one actually. This is the King James version that we were told to use, and the chakras element that I talked about. So here I've got different things like the senses and the chakras. So here I was telling you about what I was just telling. I'll quote what I said now for real. So this is in John 1.
Revelations,
actually.
right?
The Revelations,
Okay.
yeah. Revelations of Saint John. And it says on number 4, John, to the 7 churches which are in Asia, grace be unto you, and peace from him which is, and which was, and which is to come, and from the 7 spirits which are before his throne. And then it goes on, and it says, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Even so, amen. So this is a direct, like kind of like cloaked description of like the worship and the ascent through the chakras to the highest chakras that we're talking about in the God and the altar of the spine.
Mm-hmm. My mind, I don't know why I'm programmed this way, but my mind goes to some conspiratorial ideas of how much of the word of Jesus was edited out of the Bible because it was written, like, was it 200 years or something crazy after his death? So how many nuggets of information back then there would have been that would have been revolutionary.
Well,
go.
Yeah, so we don't. I obviously asked that same question, and well, we're privileged to have the Yogananda's second coming of Christ, right? Because he says in that book that it isn't just conjecture. He's speaking from experience and revelations that have been given to him and meetings with Christ. So we're privileged that he can actually take what's there and take the essence and what is real and what what actually happened, and we've got that in a condensed form, which is 2,000 pages, but it's still a condensed form compared to the Bible, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he added the Gospel of Thomas, which is not part of the King James Bible. And he did use the King James Bible. I was wondering before the second coming of Christ came out which version of the Bible he would be using, and he was using that. I'm guessing also because it was very, very widespread. And he added also this super interesting section in the beginning in his foreword or introduction about this Russian scientist Notovich, who did research on Jesus Christ's time in India. And that was also super interesting. So the second coming.
What did it say? Do you remember?
Yeah. I mean, not verbatim, but it basically starts out by saying that Jesus, the Bible talks about Jesus when he grows up, and then it jumps to him returning to Jerusalem, and there's like many years in between that aren't talked about. And then at the same time, there's a Saint Issa in India that is being talked about in different books in India. And then there is apparently in Pakistan somewhere a place where Saint Mary is buried and things like that. And so they basically try to explain this by saying that when he was 18, he left Israel and went to India and then met some great masters there and then came back.
Mm-hmm. Epic. Yeah. My mum's a strong Catholic, and I was reading the book, The Second Coming of Christ, and on Jesus, and immediately it caught my mom's attention. But I think, she would need a selfie of Jesus in India before she would believe any kind of rhetoric that is not the mainstream.
You should give her if she's willing. You should give her the Yoga of Jesus, which is the thin, the very thin book, and that's got a very, for a layperson or someone that's completely new to Yogananda, it's very very good, I think, for a traditional
much easier,
Christian. Yeah,
much easier to digest than The Second Coming of Christ. And
sure.
also in The Second Coming, the Revelation section that Priyank's talking about, they didn't talk about it that much in there, and because, like you said, they talk about the chakras, and there's a lot of symbolism in there that is not so easy to decode, I would say, because it goes on later, right? It talks about 7 candlesticks and 7 seals that will open.
The next cool bit is I was in spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. And you will know from some of our meditation practices that we're listening for Om vibrations. And then the other thing here is and I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And it goes on. So it's
Awesome.
This fascinating stuff in the context of Eastern philosophy.
Well, the symbolism's more or less there, isn't it? And the Christians, they have the dove, isn't it? The descending dove, which is white, and it tends to be backed by shimmering white light, which they say that descends on man, and you could easily say that you could take that as looking up at the point between the eyebrows and seeing the light descending.
If an eye be single.
If that eye be single, yeah.
Yes.
So there's lots of similarities. So that's the content of the minute, and we have quite a funny little odd video of Yogananda playing at the very end of his speech that we just heard the audio clip of, and it's him kind of standing, hair down, well kept. It looks like I have sort of long hair myself, so I can only appreciate how much time it took him to maintain the beauty of of that amount of hair. So he's kind of speaking, isn't he? He's miming in a sense. I think, Brian, maybe this has been shown part before.
Yeah, it has. So not this particular clip, but in the previous minute we saw Yogananda and 3 or 4 devotees walking with him in New York, and they used that footage for posters and other things to promote his talks. So, but this one is, again, it seems to be one of those where he's trying to, I think he's kind of acting that he's talking, and he's then pictures are being taken of him, and obviously moving pictures which would be used for promotion material, and they've been kept, and it's a treasure.
It is very, seeing that for the first time, I wasn't even sure if it was real. I kind of double checked, and I was like, oh wow, that's pretty awesome that they got that in there, because the quality is actually quite good for that time. So thanks to them for having that. What's your feelings like whenever I first saw that? I did double take to see, is this real, because he's really miming, isn't he? What was your feeling? Did it strike any feeling with you, Mike, when you first saw that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the footage that we have from those days is not really that much, right? So it's trying to do your best to kind of deliver a speech with him in the picture as well, right? And it's great. Like I find that whenever you hear his voice, he's got this super booming, commanding voice, and then you see his picture. It works for me. I like the scene. I found this was a good delivery. It doesn't always have to be like a perfect kind of shot where you have everything. You can also be creative like that sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are creative. Yeah, he's got a real, I would say, boyishness about him in the picture. You know, when he's got very childish, almost, you know, playfulness in his face. You know, he's smiling, his eyes are twinkling, and yeah, it's just awesome. I kind of feel like I'm there. You know, when I'm looking at it. So as I said, that's the minute, and we want to keep this below the hour, right, Jensen? I think we've we've done it for the first time in a while. I think kind of under the hour. So well done to us. Any last bits that you want to add? Anything you missed? Anything you want to go over, Frank?
No, I think we covered everything.
Yep, Mike.
Yeah, I didn't even know we were gonna go to Revelations, but this is such an interesting topic that I hope it will come up in another episode, or because this will be its own podcast as well at some point.
So we can have you guys as a podcast, Revelations as a podcast, and Babaji, and we had Babaji, and who else? Beatles. George Harrison, right?
Steve Jobs as well, no?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Spin-offs. For another time, another lifetime, I think. Guys, Jagger, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Jagger, everyone.
Jagger.
See you next time.